Farika. I'm from the island of Jamaica. And these are some of the stories that I learned from my ancestors, the Maroon people of Jamaica. Most of us know very little about the Maroon people. And when we speak of them, we always speak of them in the past, as if they're only confined to long ago times. And we fail to see the relevancy of their struggle and their history to contemporary society. Now, these people that have been nicknamed the Maroons or the Cimarrons were Africans who refused to be enslaved. They said, oh no, we insist to have the right to practice our African-centered way of life as we see fit. And we do not need a slave master over us. Contrary to popular myths, wherever slavery existed, Africans resisted. And the most outstanding set of Africans who resisted were those who decided to steal themselves away from the master and not run to the cities and built up places, but into the hills and the swamps, away from prying eyes. So they could now begin to recreate Africa and bring it close to them. Keep up the memories of their songs, their chants, their way of praising the Almighty. And at the same time, take what was useful from the contemporary environment around them and integrate it into their way of life. A few years after the first set of Africans were brought to the island of Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and Dominican Republic, we have reports of some of them running off into the hills and beginning their own communities. These so-called Maroon communities sprang up all over the Americas. We had them in Cuba, we had them in Suriname, Bolivia, Brazil, Panama, Mexico, all over. Although they were very African, yet still, when it was necessary, they integrated, as in Florida, with the native people. They affected history. We think of them as only fighting against slavery, but they did more than that. They invented the art of camouflage. So whenever you see soldiers of the British and all the colonial powers in these fatigues, it comes from them. They're the ones who knew that they must blend in with the environment and not wear bright red coats and big heavy boots that one could hear miles and miles away. In order to ensure their freedom, African ingenuity took place. And let us talk about those in Jamaica, because that's where I'm from. They're one of the best known set of Maroons. Now, I can give you a lot of history about the Maroons, but I'll just give you a little touch. In 1655, when England didn't have a king, because they'd cut off their king's head, Oliver Cromwell was in charge of England. And he sent a fleet to capture Hispaniola. They couldn't get Hispaniola because the Spanish had it well under control because of the gold they found there. So rather than go home empty-handed, they went to Jamaica. Jamaica was poorly defended. It was only a supply place for Hispaniola and Cuba. So they kind of almost just walked into Jamaica and took it over. By the time the Spaniards realized it, they were there. Well then, some of the Spaniards fled, and some ran up into the hills. The Africans ran to the hills too. Now here we had a reverse situation. The Africans were now in charge of the Europeans. They couldn't eat, they didn't know what to do unless the Africans helped them. Because the Africans had been brought in by the Spaniards as kind of like cowboys and field hands, and they were accustomed to roam the interior of the land, and so they knew the terrain very well. England studied the situation and said to the Africans, stay out of this fight. If you do, we will proclaim you as free people, and we will not enslave you. And they put up a proclamation like that. Spain hadn't made that proclamation, so the Africans decided to withdraw. Spanish resistance collapsed, and the Spaniards had to leave. Those who had remained, they had to get out. But in leaving, according to oral history, they left their arms and their munitions with the Africans. So now here we have a set of Africans on the land who are armed. And guess what? In their opinion, the island belonged to them, because the English were invaders. 83 years of guerrilla warfare ensued between the Africans and the English people. The English people wanted to set up a plantation system. The Africans were a problem to them for setting it up. The Africans felt that the English people wanted to make them slaves instead of having to go all the way to Africa for slaves. Oh, wonderful things happened. We had Queen Nanny. We had Kojo. We had Quao and Johnny and Quao and Akompong and Quaco. All brothers of Kojo, all mighty men, each having a town that they ruled. Nanny was queen of the East. Kojo was king of the West. Nanny coordinated with Kojo, but she had her own thing going on. She had 300 fighting men under her. And she used African spirituality to confuse and defeat the British. Even today, Nanny is a mystery. She reveals her secrets only to those whom she chooses. There is a lot of magic and mystery in the Blue Mountains and Nanny. She had a pot that boiled, but there was no fire under the pot. She was a herbalist. She was a healer. She was a military strategist. She was from royal family in Ghana. She never went into battle herself, but she planned them. And as a priestess, she prayed often. She preserved the songs and the dances and the chants of her people and made sure that the children learned them. She's the mother of all the Maroons, but particularly the mother of those in Moortown, Jamaica. Let me just tell you something about Nanny. She never wanted to stop fighting until the entire island was free. Let me tell you something about her brother, Kojo. When the heat of the battle took him, he marched his men along the spine of Jamaica to the cockpit country, which is called the land of look behind. Why did it get that name? Because the English soldiers always had to be looking behind them. His descendants, who live in a compound today, their land is a land that has never been conquered. He's called the mountain lion. And through the mystic vibrations, a compound has the largest number of people who came from Sierra Leone there. It is said that either by accident or by the will of the people, there was a shipwreck of enslaved Africans, captured Africans from Sierra Leone. And once the ship was wrecked, they all ran up to Cudjoe, to his area. And so today, their descendants still speak and sing some of the songs from Sierra Leone. They're called Salone songs. How did the Africans defeat the British? One of the main instruments of their defeat was this horn called the abeng. Abeng still means horn in Ghana, in the Akan language of tree. The abeng could be heard from far away as 5 miles. During those days, the walkie-talkie had not been invented, so the British had no means of communications. But at all times, the Africans could communicate with each other by blowing the abeng. This horn is a side-blown horn. It is blown by special people. The Africans usually have their communities in remote areas that you could only approach it single file, in single files. And they'd have an abeng man on one hill and the other hill. And anybody who was approaching, they could blow the horn and let ones know what was happening. It has a secret coded language that even to this day is not properly decoded. So if the English were coming with 500 men, the horn man could blow and say, there are 500 English soldiers approaching, they're 5 or 10 miles off, get ready. The English hated the sound of the abeng, because the abeng is said to raise the spirits of the ancestors. Another means of defeating the British was that the Africans dressed like trees. They cut down the tree of the Cocoon Bush. It is said that that bush had some effect of calming one spirit. And they wrapped themselves up from head to toe. It is said that Nanny is the one who invented that. And they'd stand for hours waiting on the British. And then a tree would spring out at these British. Can you imagine how scared they were to see trees attacking them? And the Africans always left a survivor, so he could go back and tell his comrades what happened, or what he thought happened, because most of them never discovered that it wasn't a tree, and they knew Africans could do magic. So these type of things demoralized the English people. Another thing that they did was that they knew the environment in which they lived, and they lived in accordance with it. They could make sounds like birds or frogs or and whatever animals they were. And they could talk to each other that way. They knew how to walk very softly, how to cook without fires. The art of jerking came from out of this experience, to preserve things and not to make a big smoke so that the British could know where their camps were. They had certain leaves that they could get water from, so they could go for days without water because they knew to get it from the plants. These secrets were not known to the British. They were very hostile to the environment. They stomped through the jungle like elephants, making big noises, whereas the Africans walked on tiptoes. And then they never fought face to face. Well, I wouldn't say never, because there was a serious battle where they, at Seaman's Valley, where Nanny's people had to be face to face with the sailors and defeated them. But most of the times, they didn't do that. They would roll over, you know, all those things you see with these cowboys doing, rolling over and carrying on. They got it from our ancestors. That's what they would do. They didn't fire shots standing up. They rolled over. And they said that they never missed a shot. As a matter of fact, the British people coming through the land of look behind used to ride a horse one facing forward and one facing backward, because they were so afraid of Kojo's sharp shooters. Well, when it came to Queen Nanny, they had a special pick on her, calling her the old hag and all those sort of names. They didn't like her at all. And so several times they invaded our town, until finally they brought a civil gun up there, claimed that they had destroyed the town and all the Maroons, but the Maroons saw them coming and decided that it was time for them to leave, because they would keep coming all the time. So they captured Nanny Town. Then they went over, and they claimed they had killed Nanny too. There's still some books saying that Nanny died in 1734. But there's a land grant given to her, Negro Nanny, in 1740, so she couldn't have died in 1734, unless it was another nanny, which is another point, because there were several nannies. That's why the Maroons don't call her Nanny. They call her Grandy Nanny. That means she's the greatest of all nannies, because Nanny is a title. It's not really a name. It's a combination of Nana and Ni. Nana from Ghana, an elder, a chief, a respected person, and Ni, also from Ghana, means mother. It's a great queen mother. That was her. And she didn't die in 1734. Well, the British decided that since they had Nanny's town split into many places, and they felt they had conquered it, now they need to go up to Cojo town and do the same. But there was a woman there who knew how to dance, and she was an African spiritualist. So as she danced And she danced, and she danced. Then she could pull up the spirits of the British. And she saw them coming into her town. And she knew the time when they were coming. They were planning a surprise attack on the Maroons. But instead, Kojo and his men surprised them. They knew the narrow trail that they had to walk up, single file. And there was a cave there, a hidden cave. Looks just like a little rock. And the British weren't very careful to look at environments. So the Maroons hid around the cave, put the Abeng man with the Abeng in the cave, placed a rocking stone along the path. The British stepped on it, each soldier, it rocked and made a noise. They didn't care about noises. Didn't mean matter at all to them. Out came the soldiers, bottling them this way, that way, that way. They couldn't escape. A crack battalion that England had sent to subdue these Africans. So it is said in oral history, the history books refuse to write this. I mean, every year in our compound they tell these tales, but I never saw it in a history book, or even in one of the government pamphlets. Every man that carried a gun in that army was killed except the chief of the army. And he was told to go to the British Parliament and tell them to send some more soldiers because the Maroons were ready for them. Oh my Lord, when he went to Parliament, what an excitement. They debated and they debated and they debated. And they said, well, we better make peace with these people. And they said, no, you can't make peace with slaves, black people. No, no, no. And every time it came back to that conclusion, so they offered a peace treaty to end hostilities between the two parties, because they recognized it was easier to win with the pen than on the battlefield. Now, Queen Nanny had heard they were going to offer these peace treaties. She didn't want it. And she went to her brother and said, don't you sign that peace treaty. He said, oh, no, I'm not listening to you, woman. Come on, woman. I want my people to be free, and I'm tired of fighting, and I'm getting old, and, you know, all these excuses. So he signed the peace treaty. So her people had to sign, because they could not stand up by themselves. Yes, Nanny really wasn't interested in a treaty being signed. She wanted the entire island for herself. She used to keep in touch with Cuba, and boats were coming back and forth, and she was trading with people, keeping in touch. It is said that as a mystic she could communicate with Africa. But she had to bow to the will of her people. And so she made sure that her people had a place, her special people, Nanny's yo-yo. She managed to get a land grant for her and her people to reside. People are still talking about how she could get a land grant. Those land grants were given out to white people. And it was lands that had been stolen from Nanny. And then they were asking white people to come and settle on the land. And now here is Nanny, applied for a land grant and got it. And the land grant said she transported herself and her servants from Africa. So that's why some of the Maroons say, well, Nanny was never a slave, because the land grant says Negro Nanny and her people with her who transported themselves from Africa. So that's a lot of talking going on. Nanny is supposed to be a sister of Kojo. There's another story that she and Sekusa, her sister, were on a slave plantation, and she ran away, and Sekusa also ran away, but Sekusa's baby cried, and so she was caught. So that we are two sisters' children. Children of Sekusa grew up on a slave plantation, the children of Nanny stayed free. It's a kind of African myth, African fable. But what I need to remind you of is that the Maroons are still there, the descendants are still there, keeping up the traditions, talking the songs, communicating with their ancestors. There's a lot of communication going on. The ancestors are there, watching over, helping and guiding, even today. That's where there's a lot of mystic, and slavery and the days of old are very near to the Maroons. They don't talk about it as if it's something that happened long ago. They live their history. And we need to know how our ancestors managed, how they sustained themselves, how they kept Africa alive, how they governed themselves, how the island of Jamaica has a terrible problem with violence, and yet these people dwell in their communities and have no such history. There is no murder there, no violence, very minimal. And one of the reasons for this is that the treaty requirement said that if there was murder in the community, it had to be tried outside the community by the Jamaican or British government. And because they love their people so much, they don't want them to be sent out into those courts. So they just don't commit violence, which shows us that if we loved ourselves enough, we wouldn't do it either. So there are many lessons in Maroon history, hidden lessons that are in plain view. Just like the Maroons look like ordinary Africans now, and you'd be walking by and you wouldn't know one. So let us examine that history and contribute to it and learn.